بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
Assalamu alaikum viewers. We are going to record complete history of Islam audiobooks and other audiobooks on Islamic history. For this we need your support. Request you to please like our videos, share and subscribe our channel. If you have any suggestions, kindly leave your comment in any of our videos. Jazakallah khairan. In the time of the Prophet ﷺ, the best of you in Jahiliyyah are the best of you in Islam, as long as they have understanding. Khalid and the tall boy glared at each other. Slowly they began to move in a circle, the gaze of each fixed intently upon the other, each looking for an opening for his attack and each wary of the tricks that the other might use. There was no hostility in their eyes, just a keen rivalry and an unshakable determination to win, and Khalid found it necessary to be cautious. For the tall boy was left-handed and thus enjoyed the advantage that all left-handers have over their opponents in a fight. Wrestling was a popular pastime among the boys of Arabia, and they frequently fought each other. There was no malice in these fights. It was a sport, and boys were trained in wrestling as one of the requirements of Arab manhood. But these two boys were the strongest of all and the leaders of boys of their age. This match was, so to speak, a fight for the heavyweight title. The boys were well matched, of about the same age. They were in their early teens. Both were tall and lean, and newly formed muscles rippled on their shoulder and arms as their sweating bodies glistened in the sun. The tall boy was perhaps an inch taller than Khalid, and their faces were so alike that one was often mistaken for other. Khalid threw the tall boy, but this was no ordinary fall. As the tall boy fell, there was a distinct crack, and a moment later, the grotesquely twisted shape of his leg showed that the bone had broken. The stricken boy lay motionless on the ground, and Khalid stared in horror at the broken leg of his friend and nephew. The tall boy's mother, Hantma binte Hisham bin Al-Mughira, was Khalid's first cousin. In course of time, the injury healed, and the leg of the tall boy became whole and strong again. He would wrestle again and be among the best of wrestlers. And the two boys would remain friends. But while they were both intelligent, strong, and forceful by nature, neither had patience or tact. They were to continue to compete with each other in almost everything that they did. The listener should make a mental note of this tall boy, for he was to play an important role in the life of Khalid. He was the son of Al-Qattab, and his name was Umar. Soon after his birth, Khalid was taken away from his mother, as was the custom among the better families of the Quraysh, and sent to a Bedouin tribe in desert. A foster mother was found for him, who would nurse him and bring him up in the clear, dry and unpopulated air of the desert. The foundations were laid of the tremendous strength and robust health that Khalid was to enjoy throughout his life. The desert seemed to suit Khalid, and he came to love it and feel at home in it. From babyhood, he grew into early childhood among the Arabs of the desert. And when he was 5 or 6 years old, he returned to his parent home in Makkah. Sometime in his childhood, he had an attack of smallpox. It was a mild attack and caused no damage except to leave a few pock marks on his face. These marks did not, however, spoil his ruggedly handsome face, which was to cause a lot of trouble among the belles of Arabia, and some to himself too. The child became a boy, and he has reached the age of boyhood. He came to realize with the thrill of pride that he was the son of a chief. His father, Al Waleed was the chief of Bani Makhzum, one of the noblest clans of the Quraysh, and was also known in Makkah by the title of Al Waleed, the unique. Khalid's upbringing was now undertaken by the father, who did his best to instill into Khalid all the virtues of Arab manhood: courage, fighting skills, toughness, and generosity. Al Waleed took great pride in his family and his ancestors and told Khalid that he was Khalid, son of Al Waleed, son of Al Mughira, son of Abdullah, son of Umar, son of Makhzum, son of Yaqza, son of Murrah, son of Qab, son of Luweh, son of Ghalib, son of Fir, son of Malik, son of Al Nazr, son of Kinana, son of Quzima, son of Mudrika, son of Ilyas, son of Muzar, son of Nizar, son of Ma'ad, son of Adnan, son of Ud, son of Muqwam, son of Nuhur, son of Terah, son of Yarub, son of Yashjub, son of Nabid, son of Ismail, son of Ibrahim, son of Azar, son of Nahur, son of Saruq, son of Arqu, son of Falak, son of Iber, son of Shalak, son of Arfaksha, son of Sam, son of Nuh, son of Lam, son of Matushakla, son of Idris, son of Yard, son of Muhil, son of Painan, son of Anush, son of Sheesh, son of Adam. The great tribe of Quraysh that inhabited Makkah had evolved a clear-cut division of privilege and responsibility among its major clans. The three leading clans of the Quraysh were the Bani Hashim, the Bani Abduddar, and the Bani Makhzum. The Bani Makhzum was responsible for matters of war. This clan bred and trained the horse on which the Quraysh rode to war. It made arrangements for the preparation and provisioning of expeditions and frequently provided the officers to lead Quraysh groups into battle. This role of the Bani Makhzum set the atmosphere in which Khalid was to grow up. While a child, he was taught to ride. As a Makhzumi, he had to be perfect rider and soon acquired mastery over the art of the horsemanship. But it was not enough to be able to handle trained horses. He had be able to ride any horse. He would be given young untrained clothes, had to break them and train them into perfectly obedient and well-disciplined war horses. The Bani Makhzum were among the best horsemen of Arabia, and Khalid became one of the best horsemen of Bani Makhzum. Moreover, no Arab could claim to be a good rider if he only knew horses. He had to join just as on a camel, for both animals were vital for Arab warfare. The horse was used for fighting and the camel for long marches, in which horses were tagged along unmounted. Along with riding, Khalid learned the skills of combat. He learned to use all weapons: the spear, the lance, the bow, and the sword. He learned to fight on horseback and on foot. While he became skillful in the use of all the weapons, the ones for which he appeared to have had a natural gift were the lance, used while charging on horseback, and the sword for mounted and dismounted dueling. The sword was regarded by the Arabs as the weapon of cavalry, for this brought one nearest to one's adversary, and in front, sword fighting one's survival dependent on the strength and skills, and not on keeping at a safe distance from the opponent. The sword was the most trusted weapon. As Khalid grew to manhood, he attained a great height over 6 feet. His shoulders widened, his chest expanded, and the muscles hardened on his lean and athletic body. His beard appeared full and thick on his face. With his fine physique, his forceful personality, and the skillful drive and the use of weapons, he soon became a popular, much admired figure in Makkah. As a wrestler, he climbed height on the ladder of achievements, combining consummate skills with enormous strength. The Arab had large families, the father often having several wives to increase his offsprings. Al-Waleed was one of six brothers. There may have been more, but the names of only six have been recorded. The children of Al-Waleed that we knew of were five sons and two daughters. The two sons were Khalid Waleed, named after the father, Hisham, Ammara, and Abu Shams. The daughters were Fakta and Fatima. Al-Waleed was a wealthy man. Thus, Khalid did not have to work for a living and could concentrate on learning the skills of riding and fighting. Because of this wealthy background, Khalid grew up to this great economy and became known for his lavish spending and his generosity to all who appealed to him for help. His generosity was one day to get him into serious trouble. Al-Waleed was a wealthy man, but the Quraysh were a surprisingly democratic people and everybody was required to do some work or the other, either for numeration or just to be useful member of society. And Al-Waleed, who hired a paid large number of employees, would work himself. In his spare time, he was a blacksmith and a butcher, slaughtering animals for the clan. He was also a trader, and along with other clans, would organize and send trade caravans to neighboring countries. On more than one occasion, Khalid accompanied trade caravans to Syria and visited the great trading cities of the fair provinces of Rome, where he would meet the Christian Arabs of the Ghassan, Persians, and Ctesiphon, Copts from Egypt, and the Romes of the Byzantine Empire. Khalid had many friends with whom, as with his brothers, he would ride and hunt. When not engaged outdoors, they would recite poetry, recount geological lines, and have bouts of drinking. Some of these friends were to play an important part in Khalid's life, and this story and the ones deserving special mention beside of Umar were Ammar bin al-As and Abdul Hakam. The latter's personal name was Amr bin Hisham bin al-Mughira, though he was to earn yet another name later, Abu Jahl. He was an elder cousin of Khalid, and there was Abul Hakam's son, Ikrama, Khalid's favorite nephew and bosom friend. Al-Waleed was not only the father and mentor of his sons, he was also their military instructor, and from him Khalid got his first lesson in the art of warfare. He learned how to move fast across the desert, how to approach a hostile settlement, how to attack it. He learned the importance of catching the enemy unawares, of attacking him at an unexpected moment and pursuing him when he broke and fled. This warfare was essential tribal, but the Arabs knew the value of speed, mobility, and surprise, and tribal warfare was mainly based on offensive tactics. On reaching maturity, Khalid's main interest became war, and he soon reached the proportion of an obsession. Khalid's thoughts were the thoughts of battle, his ambition were ambitious of victory. His urges were violent, and his entire psychological makeup was military. He would dream of fighting great battles and winning great victories. Himself always the champion admired and cheered by all. He promised himself battle. He promised himself victory. And he promised himself lots and lots of blood. Unknown to him, destiny had much the same ideas about Khalid, son of Al-Waleed. A certain Arab would walk the streets of Makkah at night, lost in thought. He was a member no longer wealthy of noble clan of Bani Hashim, strikingly handsome man of medium height with broad, powerful shoulders. His hairs ended in curl just below his ears. His large dark eyes, fringed with long lashes, seemed pensive and sad. There was much in the way of life of the Arabs that caused him pain. Everywhere around him, he saw signs of decay in the injustice done to poor and helpless, in the unnecessary bloodshed, in the treatment of women who were considered as no better than domestic animals. He would be deeply anguished whenever he heard reports of the life burial of unwanted female children. Certain clans of the Arabs had made a horrible ritual of the killings of infant daughters. The father would let the child grow up normally until she was 5 or 6 years old. He would then tell her that he would take her for a walk and dress her up as for a party. He would take her out of the town or settlement to the site of a grave already dug for her. He would make the child stand on the edge of his grave, and the child, quietly unaware of her faith and believing that her father had brought her out for a picnic, would look eagerly at him, wondering when the fun would start. The father would then push her into the grave as the child cried to her father to help her out. He would hurl large stones at her, crushing the life out of her tender body. When all movements had ceased in the bruised or broken body of his poor victim, he would fill the grave with the earth and return home. Sometimes he would brag about what he had done. This custom was not, of course, very widespread in Arabia among the famous families of Makkah. The Bani Hashim, the Bani Umayyah, and the Bani Makhzum, there is not a single instance on record of a female child being killed. This happened only among some desert tribes and only in some clans. But even the exceptional occurrence of this revolting practice was sufficient to horrify and sicken more intelligent and virtuous Arab of the time. Then there were the idols of Makkah. The Kaaba had been built by the Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam as the house of God, but had been defiled with gods of wood and stone. The Arabs would propitiate these gods with sacrificial offerings, believing that they would harm a man with anger and be bountiful when pleased. In and around the Kaaba, there were 360 idols, the most worshipped of whom were Hubal, Uzza, and Lat. Hubal, the pride of the Arab pantheon, was the largest of these gods and was carved of red agate. When the inhabitants of Makkah had imported this idol from Syria, it was without right hand. So they fashioned a new hand of gold and stuck it on it to its arm. In the religion of Arabs, there was a curious mixture of polytheism and belief in Allah, the true God. They believed that Allah was Lord and Creator, but they also believed in the idols, regarding them as sons and daughters of Allah. The position of the deity in the Arab mind was like that of divine council, God being the president of the council, which these other gods and goddesses were members, each having supernatural powers, though subservient of the president. The Arabs would swear by Hubal or by another god or goddesses. They would also swear by Allah. They would name their sons Abul Uzza, that is the slave of Uzza. They would also name their sons Abdullah, the slave of Allah. It would not be correct to suggest that everything was wrong with the Arab culture of the time. There was much in their way of life which was glorious and chivalrous. There were qualities in the Arab character which would be enviable today: courage, hospitality, and a sense of personal and tribal honor. There was also an element of vindictiveness in the blood feuds of were passed down from father to son. But this was understandable and even necessary. In a tribal society where no central authority existed to enforce law and order, violent tribal and personal retaliation was the only way to keep the peace and prevent lawlessness. What was wrong with Arab culture lay in the fields of ethics and religion. And this fields Arab life had hit an all-time low. This period became known in history as the ignorance. During the ignorance, Arab actions were acts of ignorance. Arabs' beliefs were beliefs of ignorance. The ignorance was thus not only an era, but an entire way of life. The Arab mentioned at the beginning of this chapter took to retiring to a cave in a hill not far from Mecca. For a month every year, this cave he would spend his time in meditation and reflection, and he would wait not knowingly just what he was waiting for. Then one day, while he was meditating in the cave, he suddenly became unconscious of a presence. He could see no one, and there was no sound of movement, but he could feel that someone was there. Then the voice said, "Read." Alarmed by the phenomenon of this disobedient voice, the Arab exhaled, "What shall I read?" The voice was louder as it repeated, "Read." Again the Arab asked, "What shall I read?" The voice now seemed terrible as it called sternly, "Read." Then the voice continued in a more gentle tone, "Read in the name of your Lord who created man from your clot. Read, and it is your Lord, the bountiful, who taught man that which he knew not." This happened on Monday in the month of August 1610 CE. The world would never be the same again, for Muhammad had received his first revelation. A new faith was born. When Muhammad received this revelation, Khalid was 24 years old. For 3 years, the Prophet remained silent, receiving guidance through the angel Jibreel alayhi salam. Then he was ordered to start expounding the religion of Allah, and he started with his own family and clan. Most of them, however, scorned his teaching and made fun of the new faith. One day, the Prophet decided to collect his closer relatives and give them a good meal at his house. This would give him an opportunity to get them together and put them in a situation where they would have to listen to him. The meal was duly arranged and heartily eaten by the guests. The Prophet then addressed the assembled guests and said, "O Bani Abdul Muttalib, by Allah, I do not know of any man among the Arabs who has come to you with anything better than I have brought you. I bring you the best of this world and the next. I have been ordered by Allah to call you to Him. Who will help me in this work and be my brother and deputy?" The response of the entire gathering was silence. No one replied, each watching the others to see if anyone would get up to support this man. And then a thin, undersized boy with the skinny legs in his early teens sprang and piped in a voice which had not yet broken, "I, O Prophet of Allah, will be your helper." There was a roar of laughter from the guests at what appeared at the time to be a ridiculous sight, rude and contemptuous laughter as they stood up and began to walk away. But the boy was impervious to such rudeness, for the next instant he had been clasped by Prophet in a loving embrace. The Prophet declared, "This is my brother and deputy." The boy was the Prophet's cousin Ali, son of Abu Talib. He was the first male to accept Islam at the hands of the Prophet. Gradually, the truth began to spread. A few individuals mostly youths or weak, helpless people, accepted the new faith. Their number was small, but their courage was high. And the Prophet's spheres of activity widened in spite of the rebuffs and insults which were hurled at him by the Quraysh. He continued to accost people at street corners and in the marketplace and warned them of the fire which await the evildoer. He would deride the idols of wood and stone and call them to worship of the true God. As his activities increased, the opposition of the Quraysh became harder and more vicious. This opposition was directed mainly by four men: Abu Sufyan, whose personal name was Sakram bin Harb, and who was the leader of the Bani Umayyah; Al Waleed, father of Khalid; Abu Lahab, uncle of the Prophet; and Abul Hakam. Of the first and the last, we will hear a lot more in the story. Abu Sufyan and Al Waleed were men of dignity and self respect. While they directed the opposition against the Prophet, they did not demean themselves by restoring to violence or abuse. Al Waleed's initial reaction was one of the ruffled dignity. Is the prophethood to be bestowed on Muhammad? He exploded. While I, the greatest of the Quraysh, and their elder among to get nothing? And there is Abu Masud in the chief of Saqif. Surely he and I are the greatest of the two towns. This grand old man lived in a world of his own where everything depended on nobility of birth and rank. He was, of course, being unfair to the Prophet, for the line of Muhammad joined his own sixth generations back, and the family of Muhammad was no less noble than his own. In fact, in recent history, that Prophet's family had acquired great provinces than any other family in Mecca. The Prophet's grandfather, Abdul Muttalib, had been the chief of all the Quraysh in Mecca. According to Ibn Hisham, it was in connection with the statement of Al-Waleed that the Quranic verses was revealed. And they say, if only this Quran had been revealed to some man from the two great towns, the two towns were Makkah and Taif, and another Quranic revelation revealed to have referred to Al-Waleed, who have stated in the preceding chapter, was known by the title of Al-Waleed, the unique. Leave me with him whom I created, Wahid, and bestowed upon him ample means, and sons abiding in his presence, and made smooth for him. Yet he desires that I should give more. Nah, for lo, he also been stubborn over revelations. On him I shall impose a fearful doom. Then he looked, then he frowned and showed displeasure. Then he turned away in pride and said, this is nothing but magic from of old. This is nothing but the speech of a man. Him shall I filling into the fire. The most bloodthirsty and vindictive of these leaders was Abul Hakam, cousin and friend of Khalid. As a result of his violent opposition to Islam, he was given by the Muslims the nickname of Abu Jahl, the ignorant one. And it is by this name the posterity was to know him. A small thought and very man with a squint, he has been described by a contemporary as a man with a face of iron, a look of iron, and a tongue of iron. And Abu Jahl could not forget that in their younger days, in a fierce wrestling match, Muhammad had thrown him badly, gashing his skin, the scar of which was to remain until his death. This prominent men of the Quraysh and some others, finding it impossible to stop the Prophet by either threat or inducement, decided to approach the aged and venerable Abu Talib, uncle of the Prophet and the leader of Bani Hashim. They would have killed the Prophet but for the strong sense of tribal and family unity which protected the Prophet. His killing would have led to a violent blood feud with the Bani Hashim, who would undoubtedly have taken revenge by killing the killer or a member of the killer's family. The delegation of the Quraysh now approached Abu Talib and said, "O Abu Talib, you are our leader and the best among us. You have seen what the son of your brother is doing to our religion. He abuses our gods. He vilifies our faith and the faith of our fathers. You are one of us in our faith. Either stop Muhammad from such activities or permit us to deal with him as we wish." Abu Talib spoke gently to them, said that he would look into the matter, and dismissed them with the courtesy. But beyond informing the Prophet of what the Quraysh had said, he did nothing to stop him from spreading the new faith. Abu Talib was a poet. Whenever anything of this sort happened, he would compose a long poem and pour all his troubles into it. In the house of Al Waleed, the actions of the Prophet became the most popular topic of conversation. In the evening, Al Waleed would sit with his sons and other relatives and recount the actions of the day and all the Quraysh were doing to counter the movement of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Khalid and his brothers heard their father describe the entire proceeding of the first delegation to Abu Talib. Some weeks later, they listened to him tell all about the second delegation to Abu Talib, which had no more effect than the first. The Prophet continued with his mission. Then Al Waleed took a bold step. He decided to offer his own son, Ammara, to Abu Talib in return for the person of Muhammad. Ammara was a fine, strapping youth in whom men and women saw all the virtues and the grace of young manhood. The Quraysh delegation approached Abu Talib with Ammara in tow. Abu Talib said the delegation, "Here is Ammara, son of Al Waleed. He is the finest of youth among the Quraysh, and the handsomest, and the noblest of all. Take him as your son. He will help you and be yours as any son could be. In return, give us the son of yours, brother, the one who has turned against your faith and the faith of your fathers, and has caused dissension in our tribe. We shall kill him. Is that not fair a man for a man?" Abu Talib was shocked by the offer. "I do not think that it is fair at all," he replied. "You give me your son to feed and bring up while you want mine to kill. By Allah, this shall not be." The mission failed. We do not know how Ammar reacted to the failure of the mission with disappointment or relief. Now, seeing no hope of persuading Abu Talib to stop the Prophet and despairing of persuading him themselves, the Quraysh decided to make the life of the Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his followers so wrenched that they would be forced to submit to wishes of the Quraysh. They set the vagabonds of Makkah against him. These hooligans would shout and jeer at the Prophet wherever he passed, would throw the dust into his face and spread the thorns in his path. They would filling filth into his house, and in this activity they were joined by Abu Lahab and Abu Jahl. This ill treatment was soon to enter a more violent phase. As the persecution of the Muslims gathered momentum, it also increased in variety of method. One man got the bright idea that he would hurt Muhammad's cause by challenging him to a wrestling match, and thus belittle and humiliate him in a public contest. This man was an unbelieving uncle of the Prophet by the name of Raqana bin Abdul Yazid, a champion wrestler who was proud of his strength and skill. No one in Makkah had ever thrown him. O son of my brother, he escorted the Prophet. I believe that you are a man, and I believe that you are not a liar. Come and wrestle with me. If you throw me, I shall acknowledge you as a true prophet. The man was delighted with himself at having thought up this unusual way of lowering the stock of Muhammad in the eyes of Makkans. Muhammad would either decline and thus look small or accept and get the thrashing of a lifetime. But that is what he thought. His challenge was accepted, and in the wrestling match that ensued, the Prophet threw him 3 times, but the scoundrel went back on his words. The Prophet himself was reasonably safe from physical harm, partly because of the protection of his clan and partly because he could give better than he took in a fight. But there were other Muslims who were in a vulnerable position, those who were not connected with powerful families or were physically weak. They included slaves and slave girls. There was one slave girl that news of whose conversion so infuriated Umar that he beat her. He continued to beat that poor girl until he was too tired to beat her anymore. And Umar was a very strong man. Many of the men and women were tortured by the Quraysh. The most famous of the sufferers, of whom history speaks in glowing terms, was Bilal bin Hamama, a tall, blunt Abyssinian slave who was tortured by his own master, Umayyah bin Khalf. In the afternoon, during the intense heat of Arabian summer, when the sun would dry up and bake everything exposed to it, Bilal would be stretched out on the burning sand with a large rock on his chest and left to the tender mercies of the sun. Every now and then his master would come to him, would look at his suffering, tormented face, his dry lips, and his swollen tongue would say, "Renounce Muhammad and return to the worship of Lat Uzza." But the faith of Bilal remained unshaken. Little did Umayyah bin Khalaf know, while he was torturing Bilal, that he and his son would one day face his exiled slave in the battle of Badr, and that Bilal would his executioner and the executioner of his son. Bilal and several other slaves, all victims of torture, were purchased by Abu Bakr, who was a wealthy man. Whenever Abu Bakr came to know of a Muslim slave being tortured, he would buy and free him. In spite of all this persecution, the Prophet remained gentle and merciful towards his enemy. He would pray, "O Lord, strengthen me with Umar and Abul Hakam." His prayer was answered insofar as it concerned Umar, who became the 40th person to embrace Islam. But Abu Jahl remained an unbeliever and died in his unbelief. In 1619, 10 years after the first revelation, Abu Talib died. The Prophet's position now became more delicate. The hostility of the Quraysh increased, so did the danger to the life of Muslims. The Prophet remained surrounded by a few faithful companions to whom he continued to preach. And among these companions were 10 who were specially close to him. These men became known as the Blessed Ten and were held in special esteem and affection by the Muslim as long as they lived.